Okay, Lexington, it's time to talk. I'm Stephanie Theakston, Program Coordinator for Lexington's Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition.
And I'm Diane, Assistant Director of Greenhouse 17 and Chair of the Prevention Coalition. Welcome to It's Time to Talk. We'll be talking to many community members to help us gain understanding and model conversations and actions to help us move forward so that you can say, it's time and I am ready to help.
Welcome to the It's Time to Talk recap. I'm Stephanie Theakston, Director of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition.
And I'm Diane, Associate Director of Greenhouse 17. So all year, we're here today to kind of do a recap of podcasts, and it's sort of amazing to me that it seems like we just started, but we met so many folks. It's kind of a sort of a catch-22, right? Lots of things, and it seems like this was forever ago. But at the same time, it seems like we just began these conversations. And so much of it was we really wanted the It's Time campaign to be able to model behavior, have conversations of things that people just weren't always comfortable or hadn't even had the experience to be part of. So we hope that this has been educational, and we hope that the It's Time podcast has been supportive for folks to be able to be part of the It's Time campaign.
Yeah, it's been a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
We've talked to a lot of people. And I think one of the most memorable and meaning podcasts for me was really our very first one with Darlene Thomas, Director of Greenhouse 17, and LaTanya Jones, local poet, activist, writer. And I think it's a conversation that they had that was really important that we don't really have enough, is the importance of, we're really talking about how complex people are, that people are not all just one thing. And I think it's important for us to remember that so that we're not looking for a monster when we're looking for abuse, right? It can be people that are charming and lovely and people in our own family that we love.
It's complex, and people are not all bad. And the very reason that survivors have cared for the person that's hurt them is because they come with good parts and pieces that we want to be able to love and care for, or we find charismatic and those things, which is why we grapple with this. It is complex. It is difficult for all of us to navigate. But with the permission, I believe it's really important to be able to confront with expectations and boundaries. And sometimes it might be, I can love you, but I know this is going on. This person's been arrested, or there's protective orders. Things have happened. And you have to say, you may have to have your own boundary to go, not in my home.
I thought that was a really great conversation.
It makes it really complex because we often do love people that are causing harm. And I think so many times in domestic violence conversations, we lean towards the person who's been victimized by it, which is critically important. But we also have to bring forth and lean into, and I think that was a phrase that you really liked, lean in with love, in also working with folks that are in our lives that might be causing harm. And so I think that was a really fascinating part in that podcast.
Yeah.
So we hope folks take a little chance to kind of go back and look at that. The other part that I think was really interesting, and we kind of alluded to it a second ago, was that they kind of led us down a path that I wasn't expecting. And so that piece about what do you do when you're at the dinner table and you've got that cousin, uncle, brother that maybe, again, you're sort of seeing signs that is maybe an abusive, might be verbally, might be emotionally, but abusive relationship, power over that person, kind of controlling things. And I was really expecting, particularly from the director of the Domestic Violence Program, Greenhouse 17, and LaTanya, who's been doing this work a long time, to be kind of hard-nosed about it, right? And both of them, to mimic what we just said, also were saying, people are complex. We need to lean into our relationship. Where do you even start when you notice it? And I think it was LaTanya that said, go with a person that you know. Go with the person you have the relationship with. That's who you can have that trust with. That's who you can check in with.
But I probably am going to address the person I know and feel most comfortable with. And if that happens to be the person that's doing the harm, or what I perceive as been doing the harm, I would probably pull that person aside, because it's not going to do you any good to make a big scene. It's not going to help the other person. But I would definitely pull them aside and say, I'm not okay. I'm never going to be okay with watching you talk to somebody that way. Nobody deserves that. I know I'm not in your family day in and day out. It doesn't matter. That language, that tone is hurtful. It's destructive. And wherever you want to be in your relationship, you're probably not going to get there if this dynamic's going on. So I care about you. You're part of my family, at the same time, I'm not going to condone what I'm watching.
And it was really a very thoughtful, and I think it was a really beautiful conversation. And I was expecting a much more black and white conversation, quite honestly.
Right. And I think that's why I liked it so much, because it reminds us that it's not black and white. And even those of us that do this work day in and day out sometimes forget that.
Right.
And I have to say, what LaTanya was saying during that podcast was really challenging to me, like in a good way, but remembering that people are dealing with their own stuff on either side, and that trauma breeds trauma, and really trying to look at it from everyone's perspective and dealing with our own stuff before we really try to help people in a way that they need help rather than in a way that we think they need help.
Leading with love, even when I know that there's a person in the room who might be causing harm. I'm a person who can cause harm. And so that allows me to be able to have some empathy and some compassion. And so I don't have to ignore the fact that that person who is causing harm is likely in some pain. And so it might just be simply, I see you, I've heard about some of the things going on. We mentioned that if there's a protective order and everybody in the family knows, there's not supposed to be any violence at this particular, I can come to that person with some empathy. I'm taking off the advocate hat, and I'm a person who's at the picnic. I'm a person who is with my family, and also probably have some understanding about how this family operates and the secrets we do keep.
When you said trauma breeds trauma, I think that was the compassionate piece, is we know that people that hurt people often have been injured themselves. Not to be overgeneralizing, but I think sometimes men who have been injured sometimes tend to act out, where women who have been injured sometimes are more internally, can cause damage internally, whether that's through depression or self-harm. And so when we know that somebody might be causing harm to others, we might need to dig a little bit deeper and see what the roots of that are.
And then our second podcast with Father Jim Sitchko and Reverend Helen Vancouvering,
Yes.
I was really shocked when, Father Jim travels the world, and he's been doing it for 25 years. And he said something to the extent of he has never heard a sermon from the pulpit or from whatever space that people are giving sermons from, depending on your faith. He's never heard one on domestic violence.
One of the things that has always amazed me, let's see, I've been ordained now for 25 years. I'm 56 years old. And it's pretty sad to say this, but I have never heard a sermon from the pulpit on domestic violence. Ever.
I was worried you might say that.
But, I think, first of all, we have to recognize, and we have to be bold enough to say emphatically that domestic violence is a sin, regardless of the situation, that this is not approved, it is wrong, and it is not something that God is part of.
That was startling, and he was really emphatic about that. He was emphatic about that, and he was like, domestic violence is really against everything that Christianity or people of faith really strive for when it's talking about humility and love and caring of, each other. And he said, that's a basic tenet that is universal across most religions. And so why aren't we standing up and talking about domestic violence? And we've been silent. And as you often will say, you'll often say, silence is just as culpable as doing nothing at all. And so if we're not doing anything, then we're part of the problem.
Yeah. And I loved how emphatic he was, particularly saying that we are called upon as people of faith to address this and to leave no room for ambiguity, that this is wrong.
Yeah, it was fierce words. It was good. I loved it. I know. He was mighty. And she was lovely too. She had done some amazing work with women in faith communities, and also had traveled and done some really interesting mission work. So she sort of had kind of built up this whole piece of women and empowerment and kind of bringing forth the strength of that and how that is recognized in the Bible and how it's reflected. But I think also from that stage, I don't know that she also had seen a lot of work from the pulpit about domestic violence. So it was refreshing.
Right. But I was so interested in that story that she told, that biblical story about a woman that is raped in the Bible, and how you can read it as, it wasn't just the person, the perpetrator, that was culpable. It was everyone,
right,
for the response. And that just really was the essence of what we're talking about with this campaign.
Yeah.
I have heard actually a very large Bible study with bishops at Lambeth Conference back 10 years ago or so, where they actually looked at the passage about Tamar, who was raped by her brother, the son of King David. And the way it was led through left us all feeling in the end, well, who was the culpable person in the end? It was all of them. It was the maids that didn't do anything about it. It was the king that did nothing about it. And that is possibly how we can reread some passages that we know in the Bible or in our faith communities, because we all have a catechism and we all have statements of belief and things like that, to reread that with the understanding that this is going on, and that the inequalities between the way men and women are being treated in the world and how we treat one another and all the rest, we're all part of this.
As a community, we are responsible for our reaction or prevention of this type of violence.
Yes, it was definitely a call to action.
It really was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So was our next one, was that the one with Kathy Love and Rob Perez, and we were talking about domestic violence in the workplace?
Yes.
Which we were really excited about, because it's something we've talked about many
For
times.
ages.
Yes.
Yeah, because businesses have such a strong role. They're in a position that no one else is in to really help support survivors and provide that protection. So that was a conversation I was really glad we could have. And the thing that floored me in that one was when Rob Perez was talking, saying how much it had really affected his bottom line. Like, not only is it the right thing to do in terms of, humanity, but it was a great business decision for him as well.
It is much more expensive to lose a good employee and hire another one than it is to take the 5 minutes to make sure the employee's okay.
And I would tell them, before we adopted this, our average tenure with people that were coming from a past of addiction or incarceration was 2 weeks. After we adopted this more relational employment model, it's 11 months.
Wow. So that definitely affects the bottom line and just general morale.
It's always a little sad to me, I just have to be honest, as an advocate, that I have to make links that doing domestic violence work is financially the right thing to do.
Right.
But I am game to get people to the table, however.
So I don't know that you have to do that. I just do that just in case.
No, I think it is good. However you can open up a door to get people to realize that being part of this solution is critical. So if your business will be better because you don't have the turnover rate, people aren't missing work, or if you're just sort of being a servant-led employer, that is modeling. And so he had taken a lot of the work that he had done with people coming from recovery, but had linked it to domestic violence with, why am I not asking these questions? And why am I seeing such turnover? And if I just dig a little bit deeper and I create policies that are supportive of my staff, and you've been pushing a little bit too, and your customer base, right, is a little different in those two. Well, Kathy with the hospital, right? I mean, that's certainly very customer base. Are our patients okay? And are we asking these questions? But I thought that was really eye-opening, and I love that was sort of speaking to the business community.
Absolutely. And as you said during that, business leaders listen to other business leaders. and talking about being emphatic at the end when Kathy said it's the right thing to do, I thought was really great. Again, no ambiguity. This is what we need to be doing.
Absolutely. I think next then was at the men, where we sort of stepped back and sort of let the men have a conversation. And we weren't quite sure how that was going to go because, we do feel that people were going to do much better with us on the set leading the questions. But we really wanted to give the space for men to be able to talk frankly with each other. And so I don't know what your takeaways with that.
Well, I thought that was so interesting because, the whole premise was that men don't have these conversations, right? And so we had two men, Scott Langster and Dominic Norwood, talking about it. And I thought they are in the work, and I thought it would be an easier conversation. But even for them, just talking to other men, it was a little difficult. They are not comfortable talking about it. And your friend Gary was on it.
Yeah. And he very much said that. He was like, we just don't talk about it.
From my perspective, it's very little talked about. Very little. It's very, not out there. No one wants to talk about it, seems like to me. And I've not experienced a lot of domestic violence. I've seen some results, but I've not seen it, in my life so I've not been around it a lot. I know very clearly how I feel about it, but I haven't experienced it very much.
Which in a way, I think, after I was talking with him afterwards, I think he was like, oh, I wish I had kind of done this or said this but I honestly think that his awkwardness, and I don't mean that rudely, but his awkwardness of we don't talk about it. Arthur Hancock mimicked that several times as well, really showed the importance of it. Then I was talking to a friend of ours, Lindsay, who and she said watching these four men have a conversation was amazingly healing for her.
She told me that too, and I was really surprised to hear that. That was not an outcome of that conversation that I was expecting, but one, of course, that I was very pleased to hear.
And I think it was sort of what we were hoping. And when you're in the midst of talking about it and planning it, I don't know that we get the full impact of just sort of watching it fresh. And so for Lindsay to say that and other people in the community to say, I needed to hear men have this talk, I think was really important. And so, certainly Gary, talking about his piece, and I know there was a part that Scott had mentioned that I thought that you had mentioned that was sort of resonated with you.
Yeah, particularly that part, we talk about in this campaign how important it is to go out into the community and be talking about these things. But Scott really made the point of saying, now I need to talk to my brother about this. I need to talk to my father about this. So it's not just in these public spaces, but we need to be having these conversations with our immediate family members as well.
That's why this is so important. We have to be able to talk to each other. And we have to sometimes even call each other to the carpet. Man, I got to talk to my dad about stuff. I got to talk to my brother about stuff. I got to talk to my friends about stuff. Not just my neighbor who I don't see all the time. Not just some dude who's acting like a jackass out in public and confront that. No. I got to talk to people who I'm going to continue to be with.
Which seems so obvious, but it still, when he said it, I just thought that it was really powerful.
Yeah. Again, kind of move the conversation outside of your formal, so with Scott and Dominic who do this work, but carry it outside to their informal spaces. And so I do think there was even a click a little bit with them. And then we can zip off this part, but the other part that the viewers wouldn't have noticed either is when the cameras went off, I think you and I found it really fascinating because all of a sudden then I think they felt even a little safer to kind of jibber jabber about the subject. So we came back on.
Right, because we said, that's the conversation.
That is the conversation.
Yeah. That was fun.
Yes.
That was a long day, but it was fun.
So our next podcast, was that around children?
It was. We had two about children. One with Melissa Wallace and Liz Epperson.
Right.
And this was one that you really wanted to have about how, we have the talk of going off to college with our children of things you should and shouldn't look out for, but we really need dating violence to be part of that talk too. Yes. Was that what you wanted to get out of that?
It was actually. It's kind of funny because it was really one that I wanted to do. In fact, I don't even know that was supposed to be the subject matter, and I co-opted it because it was so important to me that we do talk about, bullying with kids. We talk about kids going off to college. We talk about drunk driving. We do all these things parents do to prepare, kids for kind of going out into the world, middle school, high school, college, whatever, the workplace, whatever. But we don't talk about taking care of one another in domestic violence, both how your children should be in a relationship and how we look after our friends. Yeah. And so I think some of the important pieces around that was, at what age do you start this conversation, and how do you even begin it? So if you're talking about domestic violence to a 7-year-old, that's going to look a lot different. And it's going to talk about, how do you show up and be a good friend, and how do you respect that? But also, are you comfortable setting your own personal boundaries too, and around some things around bullying, and that can move forward as they become young adults?
Yeah, I thought that was great. And, throughout this campaign, we've been talking about how this is really meant to model conversations. And I think both of the episodes with children really did that. But really, this one provided some practical guidance. Like, there's not a right age. It's never too early to start talking to your kids about this, or here's some resources or things you can do. And I think you and Liz maybe had a conversation about safety planning for children. Something super tangible.
One of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of kids are encountering a lot of messaging and are taking on a lot of experiences that their development isn't really ready to process. Whether or not they're ready or we're ready, we have to address it though. And so I find that I'm actually, taking on a certain amount of healthy relationships programming at earlier ages. We used to wait until, late middle school and high school, and we're finding that by the time we are offering this content, they have already had relationships, and they've certainly already encountered some really problematic experiences, largely through social media.
But safety planning can be in lots of different areas. So taking that model and building it around kids' autonomy and their wellness and how they're going to school and interacting with their neighborhood friends or their family members. I thought it was really, I never thought about taking safety planning the other way, and so listening to Liz talk about that, I thought was really helpful.
Both of them just so
really good.
Yeah. And then the other child-focused podcast was with Rashmi Uddy Brown and Jennifer Johnson. And really, that entire podcast is probably something I would want to highlight. That was one of my favorites, and one that I clearly got a little bit more passionate about, shouty about on set, because there was just so much ground covered about how perpetrating domestic violence is a parenting choice and that there are consequences for those choices. But also Jen being so wise and saying, and whatever that consequence is, it's not going to look the same from child to child. There was one time when she was speaking and saying, we shouldn't be surprised or take it as really one way or the other. Children are sort of ambivalent towards their parent.
Making space for the fact that kids are going to feel ambivalent. Totally. They're much the same. We've talked about this for years, that survivors, like, why do they stay? Why don't they leave? And it's like, it is complex, right? Like, and some piece of that is emotional attachment, And so, and when you take that even a little further and recognize that if the child has ambivalence about their abusive parent, it makes so much sense because they have relied on that person. They often have had positive interactions, and that person is a part of them. That's right. And so for kids, it can be so complex that, like, I'm afraid of this person and I love them. Mm-hmm. They hurt me or they hurt mom, and I've relied on them, and so those truths that coexist. And I think sometimes we have an expectation of kids that they are able to navigate things that adults can't navigate.
Exactly.
Right? Like, to be able to have a clean black or white, this person is good or bad, safe or unsafe, when in reality we know that it is complex.
So I thought that was really good advice because, just as adults react in different ways to perhaps even the same situation. Of course, children are going to do that too.
Absolutely. And, some of the conversations that we have at Greenhouse 17 is a lot of folks have to co-parent with an abusive partner. So they might still be within the relationship, or they might have left the relationship, but they still have to co-parent. You have this child together for 18 plus years, right? And so sometimes in that, when that relationship when the parents are kind of going through that, we have this idea of what the kids probably are also feeling like. And I think it was Rashmi that had mentioned it, but she said, you have to be really careful as a parent because that child is still part of that parent, right?
That was important.
So to either badmouth the other parent is somewhat bad-mouthing who you internally are as a child. And it also kind of puts that kid on the defensive.
We kind of missed the boat with the kids. That's what we talked about, is what I just said a second ago about talking to the child or the youth or the teenager, and giving them permission, like I said earlier, to talk and to be honest, as much as it might hurt the others and themselves, because it does, because you don't want to ever feel like you're being unfair to a parent, even a parent who's an abusive parent, right? And I think that you brought up a really good point, because children suffer psychologically and emotionally. And that alienation that sometimes other parties want to bring into a courtroom to say it's parental alienation is really a child's way of coping and taking care of themselves.
Yes. So certainly you have to take protective steps, and you have to make sure kids are okay. But I thought that was really interesting. And I see that play out a little bit, where I am with Visitation Exchange Center and at Greenhouse 17, that comes up.
That was a really good point, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. And then, of course, maybe one of the most valuable things from that conversation was the modeling that you and Jen did about how to speak to children about maybe domestic violence at home, and how you can do that in a child-led way. Her, really leading that conversation with you was superb.
Let's imagine you're the kid I'm sitting down with, and part of what, there's often going to be something that has prompted me to inquire, right? And so maybe I've noticed that you seem like you're a little bit more sad lately than you have been, and I just think it's important that you have a chance to talk about feeling sad, and if that's something that you have been feeling, and I know everybody does sometimes. So is there anything in particular that you can think of that's been making you feel sad lately?
Well, a little bit, but thanks for noticing. I thought I'd been sort of keeping it to myself.
Yeah. A lot of times it feels like we are. So is there anything that you think would be helpful to talk about? Sometimes it's helpful just to say it out loud to somebody else. So is there anything that you've kind of wanted to tell somebody and you haven't had a chance to?
Well, sometimes home can be a little stressful. It just seems to be a lot of fighting in my house.
That would be stressful. Well, are there any other grown-ups that you've talked to about that so far, or is this kind of the first time you're talking?
This is the first time.
Okay. Well, let's make some time to sit down and we'll talk about it a little bit. Do you want to go? Maybe we'll go sit in the backyard for a little bit and we'll just chat.
That'd be good. I'd really like no one else to know that we're talking, though. I just felt really uncomfortable.
I get that. A lot of the time, that's the thing that, keeps people from saying it out loud to anybody. So I can't promise you that nobody else will find out, but I can tell you that if there is anything that I need to tell somebody else, I'll let you know. And you can only tell me as much as you want to, or as much as you feel comfortable with, okay? So we'll just start there and see what we can come up with, okay?
Thank you. Jen was fantastic. And I think not only the words that she used, but also her demeanor and her word choice and how she just was so gentle. Like, I really began to feel like I could have told her anything.
Right.
Which was the point of that conversation. Right. How do you build trust? How do you build relationship? And also be honest about it. So if you do have to report something, if you do have to tell, if you're someone coming in and you have to tell a parent or a teacher, whatever that may be honest with the child and don't say, oh, I can fix this 100%, or I don't have to tell, whatever you tell me is confidential, because sometimes it might not be, but I'm going to walk through this with you. And so I do hope folks kind of listen to that podcast, because that's really a lot of the purpose of all of them. But the It's Time campaign is giving people tools that they could go, I could do that. That wasn't so hard. I could do that.
I mean, once you see how it's done. So I think basically the gist is that we have some pretty fabulous people in our community that care about this issue, that care about our community as a whole, that care about the people around them. And of course, we've been out in the community a lot, engaging in conversations. And I think one thing we've really picked up on is that people care about this issue. As difficult as it is to talk about, people do care about it.
Yes.
They just aren't sure what to do to help.
Right.
And hopefully we have provided some modeling of conversations and some resources on the website to help people begin to think about that.
I think so too. And just to kind of go back to the very beginning, if you lean in with love, if you truly are listening, you don't have to come in and fix everything. You don't have to swoop in. You don't need to put yourself in any kind of space where it's going to cause danger. You don't want to take over, right? You and I talk about that a lot when you're helping a survivor. You don't want to take over.
You don't even have to be the expert.
Exactly. But you do have to listen. You do have to care. You do have to believe. You have to show up. Yep. Perfectly said. So,
and yes, and believe. That's also important.
Believe and show up.
Yes. So that was great.
I think so too.
And then we also had some videos with some amazing people. One of the very first ones we did was with Weta Michael, who announced that she is putting domestic violence policies in her restaurants, which is just amazing.
It is.
That was really powerful to have such a great, beloved community figure say, I am doing this, and so should you.
Today we're at my restaurant Honeywood to talk about an important issue. Domestic violence doesn't just impact the home. It impacts all areas of our community, especially the workplace. As business owners, we have a responsibility to protect our workers. That's why when it comes to domestic violence, we have a zero-tolerance policy for those employees who perpetrate domestic violence.
I think there's such a ripple from that, right? So we had Weta do that, and then certainly we had Rob Perez and Kathy Love then came on, and then we did an event sort of celebrating Weta's stance and partnership with It's Time, and other small businesses and privately run businesses have said, yes, I want to do this too. And so we do have model policy. We don't expect, just as we were talking a second ago, that it's complicated maybe to step in. You don't have to have all the answers. We have some really great model policy that if you're a business of 5 or you're a corporate entity the size of Toyota, there is guidance for people to start workplace policy.
Absolutely. And that you don't have to do it on your own. If you look at that model policy and think, I still don't really quite get this, there are people that want to help you implement this. So that's good. And then we had the leadership video.
I love that one.
Yeah. Yes. With Mayor Gorton and Vice Mayor Dan Wu and Chief of Police Lawrence Weathers. And there was a part at the beginning of that video that really resonated with you.
So I think, again, in the work that I do, there's so many myths you have to overcome around domestic violence. And the mayor immediately said, I had a friend who experienced domestic violence, and she didn't know how to get out of that situation.
I actually have a lifelong friend that I recently learned she was in an abusive relationship, and she didn't feel like she could get out.
Right.
She was trapped. There's so much to it.
That's a good point, Mayor. It affects the children, affects the relatives, affects their ability to stay in a job.
This can happen to anyone at any point in their life. It does not discern of who can be a victim and who cannot, or who can be a perpetrator and who cannot. And so that I thought really resonated that she said that.
That was great.
Yeah, it was
totally organic, right? Yeah, we weren't expecting that at all.
And that's what I liked about that whole piece. Like, we were sort of prepared to have some, prompts for people to talk about, and I'm sure Lily did have lots of prompts. But they sat right down and carried on a conversation about, with great humility, with complexity of the thought. Dan's conversation with the impact, even additionally on with people with immigrant refugee community. With the mayor talking about formal and informal leaders and the importance of both. I just thought it was a really great conversation.
And I think because it was so organic, we got some really great information from Chief Weathers. You know, he came out and said the police haven't always responded to domestic violence in the best way.
Historically, police haven't responded well to domestic violence incidents. So now we look at it like we should have been looking at it before. We have to practice prevention, intervention, education, and then reentry. We have to be available as a city to show people that there are resources out there. There are ways that they can get back on their feet and not have to be in an abusive relationship.
And I believe he, as leader of our police, is really working to change that.
I think so too. And I think, you know, and I think traditionally, and I don't mean to go off on a rip, but I think traditionally law enforcement has a tendency to come in and take charge, right? That's what they do. They arrive at a scene and they take charge. And we're sometimes asking them to do opposite of what they've been tend to be called to do. Because when you're working with a family and survivors of violence, what you're wanting to do is give, again, that power back to the victim to take some not responsibility, but ownership back and decision-making back. That's an odd juxtaposition sometimes. And so I think he's right. I think police sometimes have not done the best job. Maybe instinctually it doesn't fit the normal pattern. I so appreciate, you know, he's on our board. I so appreciate him acknowledging that.
Yeah. And then one of my favorite videos, as great as all of these have been, is the one we did with Sam Stockley from Lexington Sporting Club and Coy Connor, who's just a fantastic human being. But honestly, I will be a fan for life of whatever Sam Stockley does, because what an incredible person he is.
Yeah. I am so sorry that I've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm so sorry that I missed the beginning of filming it because I was just taken aback by it. And, you know, there's a perfect conversation, too, about if you're a coach, you're a mentor in the community, they're being able to transcend that conversation into domestic violence and connecting that up. I'm wanting, you know, these young men and women to grow up to be healthy, to be leaders, to be team players, right? And you can't do that if you're bullying or you're putting down another person. Like, you can't be a perpetrator of domestic violence and be this other thing. What you are on the court or on the field or on the pitch or whatever sport you're playing, that needs to transcend out into the community. They were brilliant. Yeah.
Right. And Sam being this, you know, formal coach of a regulated league, but Coy has coached kids in soccer, played soccer himself. So I think also those informal coaches, those volunteer coaches, I should say, are great. And Coy is just such a remarkable model of what it is to be a good person on and off the field.
A lot of people that grow up in these difficult, violent homes only know one thing, and that's to be violent themselves. But you can change the game. You don't have to do that. You can be different.
You literally can start right now being the human being that you're supposed to be, doing the right thing, treating people with respect, being kind and doing the right thing when nobody else is looking. You can start that right now. It's all on you.
You can change the game, right? That was the name of the video. But really, just because this is who you are today, if you are recognizing behaviors today that you are not really happy with yourself, you can change it. You do not have to be that person tomorrow.
That's right.
Which is, again, seems like common sense, but really to hear it, I think is really remarkable.
And I think, so yes, you get to be part of the team, right? If you kind of recognize it, and this is how you have to show up. And I think that goes back again to the Darlene and LaTanya piece. We can love you, but this is the expectation of how you show up. And so if you're showing those tendencies, you need to do some self-awareness and reflection.
And it's all doable.
It's all doable.
And there, again, people around you that want to help.
Yes.
Even if you're on that side of it.
Yeah.
People definitely want to help you be the best person that you can be. And then
oh my gosh, we did so many things.
We did so many things.
Okay. Yeah, so many.
And then lastly, the video with the young girl writing in her diary, really about how her experience of domestic violence at home ripples out into her whole life, her friendships, her ability to concentrate at school. That one is just, I mean, I really can't say much about it because it's so powerful as is. I don't want to take away from that, but man, what a powerful video.
It is powerful, and it's something that too many kids deal with all the time in their homes. And so, again, we need the community to be part of that solution, to offer, a lifeline to both. And I guess one of the things that I always, and again, you and I talk about it, Darlene with Greenhouse 17, is to look at the family as a unit of non-offending parent and child. Because sometimes I think there's always a risk that we've got to get this kid out of this situation, which we do want to lovingly have them be in a good home, but we want to do that with a protector parent as well. And so it was a powerful piece. The young woman that played that part, I think was, I think it was reflective of what a lot of people experience, and just her sense of self-worth. There was a point in it where she said, I wish I wasn't even born, or I wish I wasn't born into this family.
Dad has started it on Mom again. It makes me scared, and I'm so close to calling 911. But then what will happen? I wish I had never been born into this family. I can't make them stop. It's all my fault. Make everything worse.
And I believe that might, reiterate with a lot of people's young lives. But what we're learning about It's Time is there is a lot of love, and there's help out there, and there's folks that are ready to be able to step in.
Definitely. And I almost forgot about, because we've done so much, our Green Dot video. Yeah. That really showed how you can step in within your circle of friends.
Would you mind if I got your number? We could talk sometime.
Yeah, sure. He's in a mood today. He's not always like that.
Maybe, but that's never okay. What's your number?
Beautiful video that really models it. And I am so grateful to Mayhan Multimedia for making these beautiful videos. And, another great person that we have gotten to know better.
So many. Who?
Lily Rochelle.
She's lovely.
She's lovely.
She is a fierce advocate.
Yes. And she's here. I think, Lily, come on, come.
Do you get to join yourself? But I'll say hi. I love you guys. You're amazing. I can't squish your microphones. Remember, fake hugs. Fake hugs.
I didn't know.
Little fake hugs just for your microphones. Yeah. You had a blast.
And so the whole Mayhan Multimedia team, Esther and Brady and Chase and, of course, Mark, have all been fantastic.
Well, I love Lily's slogan, and I hope I'm getting this right, but it's helping others. No, what is it? Helping people who help others.
Helping people who help people, I think. And people who help
we got
people. Yeah.
Which I think is what It's Time is all about, and I think shows the genuineness of how Mayhan Media has approached the whole It's Time campaign.
Yeah.
And
just with a lot of compassion and insight. And so I'm a little sad, Diane, that this is our last podcast, because this has been my favorite part of the entire campaign.
Yeah. And particularly meet new people, right? Or interesting people. And it's really good.
But maybe we can do some more in the new year.
I hope so.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'll see you.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
I'll probably see you tomorrow. Okay. Yeah.
So thank you for joining us for all of that. We hope that you found it to be useful and can find ways to apply it to your own life in the roles in which you are already in.
Thank you. And if you want to, you can go to It's Time to Talk podcast on our website, itstimelexington.org, or any Apple podcast.
Thank you.